Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 397, Factoriopedia. Posted by Pard. Hello, we have gathered here today to talk about a new quality of life feature coming with version 2.0. Motivation. Factorio has quite a lot of items and recipes. Since the new things are unlocked over time, the number is manageable. However, with Space Age, there are a lot of new things you unlock, and you can start to lose track. Mods have had this problem for a long time, and there are also some mods which help to solve it, such as FNA and Recipe Book. So I guess just before we start on this one, it is a quality of life feature. There are a lot of Easter eggs hidden in the images, so I'll be speculating about them as we go through, but there's a lot of stuff that's like new and interesting in this, apart from the fundamental thing. And the fundamental thing is pretty cool. Yeah, and I can kind of attest to that. I've been doing a lot more of the overhaul mods in my live streams, and Bob's and Angels, for example, and Factorio 2 even, they add quite a lot more recipes, and it can get a bit unmanageable. And for FNA in particular, it's a bit of a lifesaver, particularly for fluids in Angels, I found, working out what fluid produces what, etc, etc. And this whole update is about basically solving that problem. The core of the problem. The core of the problem is recipe tree discovery, which has two directions. The first direction is discovering what do I need to craft an item. When I want to craft an inserter, I can hover over the recipe to find out what I need. But maybe I don't know how electronic circuits are made, so now I have to go and search for the electronic circuits recipe in the crafting menu. And only once I've found it can I look at the ingredients on it, etc. This process is already slow and annoying, but at least it is possible. The other direction is much worse. For example, you discover you can craft an advanced circuit, and you want to figure out the purpose of the item. This mostly means, what do I make with this? Answering this question is almost impossible through some kind of search right now, and you just have to look through everything or check the wiki. I fully take the point on that second one. I personally, the first one is more my problem, where I'm trying to find out, well, how do I make some random fluid, like in Angels, how do I make rocket fuel? And I have to then trace back through what fluids it needs, and if it needs a fluid I'll that I've not got, then I'll unlock that, put that in the research queue basically. But I do remember when first playing the game, there were things where I was unlocking the technology, particularly early when you get in the red and green science thing going and you're just blasting through the technologies because you don't know that maybe you should wait a bit. The solution to this problem was clear when we already had all the necessary information in the game. All we needed to do was just aggregate this useful information together in one GUI. And just like that, Factoriopedia was born. I'm not a massive fan of the name. I can see me mispronouncing that quite a lot. Factoriopedia. I guess one of the things obviously you would normally call it the Factorio Wiki, but of course there is a Factorio Wiki that you can go and look at online. So if they called it Factorio Wiki, then it would have been well, which one are you talking about? The Factoriopedia. As many of you have noticed, in Factorio Friday Facts 380, there is a new button with a book icon placed conveniently between Tips and Tricks and the Train Overview. Hiding behind this button is the new internal encyclopedia of all useful Factorio knowledge. With the Factoriopedia, you can see that the problem is solved, as the advanced circuit entry not only shows you all the ingredients, which you can directly browse, but it also shows you the list of all the recipes using this item as an ingredient. It also provides a quick reference to the technology needed to unlock the recipe, so you can quickly take a look how to get there. So this is the in-game screenshot of the screenshot of the in-game GUI, and as Bud says that you've got the advanced circuits. There was the example they're given, and it both tells you what the recipe is and about the item, that how much it stacks to. The rocket capacity is interesting, and it shows you, what the stack size is, for example. And what it's kind of doing is clearly querying all of these bits of information are in the game somewhere. Like, for example, when you hover over an item, it'll tell you, the stack size, or just in your inventory, it shows you what the stack size is. So there must be a variable somewhere, either as part of the class or object or what have you, that says how many items are the max max stack size for that item. So it's just pulling that information all together and placing it into a nice sort of succinct GUI. So you've then got the ingredients part, telling you how you would make it, basically, so what you get. It doesn't show it on this one, it shows it on the next one, but it also, this is, when it's talking here, it tells you how many you get. So when you do that craft, let's just show you. So on the small power poles, it says 2 small power poles from doing that craft. So it does still give you that information. That's a little hidden. I would say, I'd have preferred maybe a thing over here, from a readability point of view, so each craft produces something like that, but it's fine as is. There are also a couple of buttons up here. They'll come on to explain what those are, but say it's bringing together recipe information, how long it takes to craft, obviously at Unity crafting speed. Here's how you get the unlocked. I hope this links to the actual tech tree, so that you can see that if it's orange or yellow, you can click on that and it takes you to technology. That would be a really useful feature to say, right, what do I actually need here, and be tracing it through item wise. And I want to build, advanced furnaces, electric furnaces. What do I need to make them? Oh, I need red circuits. How do I get red circuits? Come here. Oh, what technology do I need to do that? Click advanced circuits and it takes you to the tech tree. That would be a really nice sort of useful feature, but if it's not in there, that's it's not a problem. But it then says everything that red circuits are used in. So we've got all of the items here. Now this is vanilla. There is nothing here that is new, but there will be in later ones. So watch out for that. If you're not familiar, so if you're wondering if these are new things, this isn't really. This is because they're doing it in the editor mode in the game, so that you're able to spawn in trees and different terrain types. There's creative items and some biters. So this isn't new. This is just part of the editor. And the recipes here, we're just seeing all of the intermediate products. Technically, recipes and items and entities are independent objects. But for most of the player structure, these are tightly connected. With this in mind, we made sure that in these cases, it is always present as one merged entry. So basically saying that these are technically different things, effectively. So the recipes, items and entities. So a power pole, and this is what I'm saying about the recipe here, where it's saying recipe, item entity. Those are different things in the game. It's just that they're so closely linked, it's probably trivial to bring them all together and present all of the information together. So as I say, this is 2 times power poles, means that when you do a craft, you get 2 of them. It's not that every 2 power poles has this property. It's just bringing in the recipe result, basically. And again, it comes via electronics, and this doesn't have, if you look at this, scroll bar, there is nothing below, because electric power pole is not used in any recipes. It's not, you used to be able to burn them, but you don't take an electric power pole in vanilla and turn it into something else. It's just, that's the end state, as it were. Again, we've got the same icons here. What is interesting is we have 5 rail pieces. So we have, 2 straight rails, a diagonal rail, and then 2 curves. My assumption is that that's because this, has the new rail in it, but it's the version, that will launch that preserves old rail. So they've said that when it switches over, for a few versions, they will support both rail types, and then eventually it will transition so that it's only the new ones. So my assumption is that it's related to that. However, I don't remember us having a diagonal rail piece as an icon, a thing. Obviously, you have diagonal rail, but it treats it as straight rail. So I'm wondering if that's there partly so that if you are looking at entities in the game and you see this diagonal rail, maybe you'd get confused as to what it is. And so they've got an icon for it. It would just show exactly the same stuff for the straight rail, maybe. But maybe there is a new, diagonal rail that's different in some way. I can't see how. I mean, I would have thought if there was something around that, we would see the, elevated rail bridges and stuff. They should be on here somewhere, but they're not. So it seems like this is all vanilla, but I think this is how they're supporting the, the transition to the new rail. It'd be interesting, actually, if the new and the old rail can connect together. Is it a sort of a mutually exclusive thing? I wouldn't see why it would be. But can you use the old curve and the new curve together? I don't think you'd be able to from how they've described it. I think maybe at like an edge case of where it's literally the start of a curve, you could connect the 2 together maybe. And it also, if you are doing a transition base, you're switching between the 2, how are you going to upgrade between them? Because the curves don't fit each other. We saw that when they introduced each other. If you've got a curve, you kind of can't match it up to the new curve. So yeah, it'd be interesting how that all works. I don't think I'll encounter it though, because I'll just start a new game, I think, when we get the expansion. The caption on it just says item, recipe and entity merged into one entry with all the info in one place. Whenever you hover over an item, recipe or entity, etc., we often provide lists of related entries. But since it is a tooltip, you can't really go and click those to explore further. However, in Factoriopedia, it is not a tooltip, so you can browse through these normally. But basically it sounds like, if you want to know what wood is, you would click wood and it would take you to the wood entry, or you want to know what copper cable is, it would take you to the copper cable entry. The caption on this GUI does say, the list of accepted fuel we added to the description of furnaces is now even more useful in Factoriopedia. So that is referring to the tooltip, because it shows you what fuels you can put in on the tooltip. But this is also showing you a lot more detail on items. So, craft speed 2, pollution 4 per minute, and stack size 50, and base health, fire resistance of 100. So it is going to give you, a really nice reference guide, especially when I think it's useful for everyone, this sort of thing. And it's saying what it can craft, and etc, etc. Right then, strap in. With the rise of specialised machines in Space Age, having the list of all the supported recipes is more useful than ever. Now then, the next screen capture is for the foundry, which is obviously the new building. And they're showing us quite a lot here. So they've scrolled down. This is, this would be the bottom part of this. Obviously, we've seen the machine already, and it would have that consume. I presume that just uses electricity for the foundry. I don't know. Maybe there is a way of burning something to make something in a foundry. But basically, we're finally seeing confirmation that to make a foundry, we need to have tungsten carbide. Okay, tungsten carbide was what I was speculating as to what they would be adding to the game with tungsten. We knew they had added the resource of tungsten, but we didn't know what it was being used to make. We just knew that you smelted it. Then what? We didn't know what you did with, what you produced with the smelted product. We now know there is something called tungsten carbide. If you remember, I showed this before. I should zoom in a bit really so you can see it. But this is tungsten carbide in the Wikipedia. The proper Wikipedia, not the Factorio Wikipedia. But basically, you can go and read this about what tungsten carbide is. And when I've been speculating about what it might be used for, as you see, cutting tools and machinery sounds like it's going to be used in the big mining drill. I mean, this is even looking like a mining drill. Yeah, mining and foundation drilling, because it's an extremely hard and extremely dense material. And it says here, it's used in nuclear power and all sorts of weird uses. But yeah, it's also used as like ammunition, and basically you use it in armor piercing rounds. So that, I say as well, that speculation I've had has come from about that. But yeah, the kind of main ones it talks about are cutting tools and ammunition, drilling. Are we going to get a new level of nuclear? Is there going to be plutonium that we can start making to power these, space age platforms? They're not spaceships, are they? Maybe. But yeah, it's used in things where hardness is what matters. And so here you go. It's used in a foundry as part of the thing. One of the things I would say that's interesting about this is how that's presented. If you look at a normal iron plate or a copper plate or what have you, they tend to be quite thin. And it's only when you get it as a material, like as in, not a material, like as in a thing you could put in the world. So when it shows you landfill or concrete or even bricks, they're shown as being thick things, because that's like a hidden patterning of how it means it can be put down on a surface. So is this saying, and this would be weird, it's probably just to differentiate it. I mean, it even looks like a brick. Is it a surface? Can we put it down somewhere? Can we put tungsten carbide down on the floor? I don't know why we would want to do that, but it's the similar sort of structure, if you look at how the refined concrete looks, they're sort of displayed the same. As I say, it's probably not that, it's probably just to distinguish it in a better way. However, saying that, at the bottom here, on the can craft list, these two, so what looks like a steel beam made out of tungsten rather, made out of tungsten, and maybe a tungsten plate. So this could be a tungsten ingot, and this could be a tungsten plate. Because if you look at the sort of colouring pattern, to me, that bluey colour is the same sort of blue. I may be completely wrong, but what I would say is that if this is the foundry and you're using it on Vulcanus, and it is Vulcanus where we get tungsten, the processing of tungsten would seem to make sense, wouldn't it? So if these aren't tungsten, how do you process tungsten, is the question, basically. It would be weird for it not to process tungsten. So to me, that says it can process tungsten, and these are the new tungsten things. That to me means we're getting, it's not really, I mean, steel is sort of the structural material, like the heavy duty structural material in the game. So when you make low density structures, weirdly, it has steel in the recipe. When you make a roboport, it's a big, heavy piece of machinery. It's got steel in the recipe. When you make a substation, great big substation, it's got steel in the recipe. So yeah, so it doesn't always work, because some of the things you can build are before you actually get steel. So they've slightly fudged it. But basically, if it's a big, heavy, solid thing that you need, toughness for, it's for steel. Well, now we're getting a tungsten carbide ingot. So that must be used in the manufacture of big, tough things. Does that hint at my possible idea that we're going to be building a mega structure? We can't quite see the full recipe list to build a foundry. So it could be that this is part on here, that 50 steel plate, again, steel used for big, tough structures. Do you need to make steel ingots in order to build the foundry? Is the missing sixth ingredient, and there may not be a missing sixth ingredient, is that tungsten ingots? So what this is saying is that tungsten carbide is not made in a foundry, because tungsten carbide is not one of the recipes listed here, is it? So how do we make tungsten carbide, and what else does it include? The carbide part is carbon, basically. It's a mixture of carbon and tungsten. So is it made with coal? Do we put coal into it, or is there charcoal in the game now? Interesting. But we can make, and which of these does it use? Or can you use both? Maybe we're getting alternate recipes for it. But how do you make, if you can make, because this has got to be tungsten plate, and then it's got to be, hasn't it? It could be something extra that you add in, but you make steel by smelting 5 iron plate together somehow. So it's got to be this tungsten ingot is made by smelting tungsten plates together. Otherwise, you're creating multiple confusing ways of doing the same thing but slightly differently. So that's interesting. So the foundry does not make the tungsten carbide. So what does? It's got to be an assembler, or I guess maybe a chemical lab. I don't see how that would make sense. Because what this also shows us, and I have zoomed this in so we can properly look at it. I hope you're ready for this. But basically, what we're seeing here is that the green... Well, firstly, that the foundry can make belts as well. When they revealed it, they said it could make low-density structures, which is there. It could make gear wheels directly. It could make copper cables directly. It could also make concrete. I don't know if that's... Actually, looking at it, that is a recolor. That, isn't it? Maybe it's just a placeholder. I shouldn't get too excited. I get too excited in these. But that, the 3 dots and the 2 and then the off-kilter 2, 3 dots, the 2, and then sort of the off-kilter 2, that is a piece of concrete, and that is a piece of tungsten carbide. So do we make tungsten carbide by mixing concrete and tungsten? That would be weird, because there's no carbon in concrete, but that is basically a recolored version of that. Huh, interesting. Yes, but we know we can make several of these already. We knew it could make steel, copper plate, iron plate. These are the molten ones. So this is outputting molten iron, outputting molten copper. This one I'm not sure about. I think that's the fundamental one of lava. So that's where you suck in lava and put out those 2 molten materials. I think that's what that is representing. It can also make the big mining drill. So this might be how you make big mining drills. Perhaps it's a recipe that can only be crafted in a foundry, and so it gives you a logical chain of buildings to unlock. That you start off with a regular mining drill, you have to do whatever you need to do to get your first bit of tungsten, then you can make foundry because you can make tungsten, then your foundry lets you make the big mining drill, you can go and replace your earlier stuff with the nice big big mining drill. But yeah, so we kind of knew about most of this. Apart from, as I say, unless maybe they had said it and I just didn't notice, but it can make all of the belts, like all of them, which blue belts require a fluid. So it's going to have a fluid, another fluid connection to it in order to do those. We don't know what the recipe is for green belts, but since this is the tungsten planet, and this is the, new material we're getting, they're going to use tungsten. I bet the next ingredient that you add in is some form of tungsten. Be it tungsten, maybe there's tungsten gear wheels, and that's what helps it go super, super fast because it's super, super tough. But yes, also, finally, we know we're getting the ability to craft the new science pack, the Vulcanus science pack. What is it called? The material science pack or something? It's not called that, is it? But I can't remember. But we're getting to the foundry will have the ability to craft the new science pack, which is fascinating. It's going to be a really quite versatile building. Yeah, so it's almost contained because it means doesn't do inserters, but it means you can. It also makes itself, by the way. You can make foundries out of foundries, but basically you can almost sort of produce a factory in terms of very basic stuff with, drills, belts, the machine to smelt it, the machine to make things. It's almost a self-contained unit, which, considering it's a massive power demand to build one, is very interesting because surely these would have to be staggeringly inefficient power-wise to build with a foundry. Unless maybe those are exclusively locked to the foundry. You can only make green belts with the foundry, maybe? Possibly. I said there was a lot in this, and another interesting thing is that building a foundry requires lubricant. Now, lubricant you obviously need oil for, and we know that Vulcanus doesn't have oil, but we know that it's absolutely riddled with coal. That's the other thing it's got there. And if that's the case, that means we're going to have to use coal liquefaction to get lubricant, which is interesting because that's sort of forcing you to do that system. Because you could, of course, stick it in barrels and send it over on a space platform, I guess. That sounds staggeringly inefficient. But it's basically forcing you to engage with, use the coal liquefaction system. I was actually quite a big fan of that, but I know that it's sort of very much an optional way of doing things. You can just use oil. But so I always really like the coal liquefaction, so it's good to see that it's getting a, basically you must use it thing, I think. But yeah, I would also say, if you've got any other thoughts, and I say there's another really big one coming up, there's another really big set of reveals coming up. But if you've got any thoughts on this, any ideas, and maybe, do you think there is going to be a sixth item and it's maybe the tungsten ingots? Or is it just this recipe set here? Fascinating stuff. I'm sure the Reddit's all got all the devs have already explained all the answers, and this video is basically redundant, but that's what always happens. Okay, so on to the next one. Looking at planets gives you mainly info about all the local resources and planet-specific recipes. And rather than show us Nauvis, for example, which we know about, we're getting some more information about Vulcanus. So this tab is for Vulcanus. I'll read out what it says. It says, a hot volcanic planet with mountains of volcanoes, rivers of lava, plains of ash, and sulfuric acid geysers, or geysers as they've misspelled it. Rich in metals, lava can only be crossed by elevated rail. It's interesting they specifically note that lava can only be crossed by elevated rail. Why would you even need to note that? Because water can only be crossed by elevated rail, can't it? It's just, I get these things, and this is where I get really carried away, and somebody points out, that I'm being stupid. But why even mention that? Why say lava can only be crossed by elevated rail? Is it basically just going back to this fact that, we won't be able to landfill lava until very late game? So that's what it's referring to. Or are we getting some sort of flying capability? Are we getting boats? Because those would be things that would allow you to cross water without elevated rail. You can't currently cross, water with rail. So why note that it can only be crossed by elevated rail? It could just be a flavour thing. It could be, just some reference to the fact that you can't landfill it. But basically, a lot of these things, it's like they put something in because there's a reason that you would want to note that. And that's where I get a lot of my, they fire off things in my brain and I just go a bit mad. But that's the type of thing it says to me. There's some reason for saying that. Now, I've got the day-night cycle is 1 minute 30. Gravity is 40 meters per square second. That's crushing, basically. So this planet is obviously incredibly dense, which makes sense if it's basically an entire, like a metal core of a planet, really. But on Earth, for reference, it's 9.8 meters per square second. So that's 4 times the gravity of Earth. the engineer must be made of stern stuff, because a normal human being would almost certainly not be able to walk in that. 4 meters per second is the type of, you call it G basically. So every time you, so 1 gravity is 1G. If it was twice as much as that, it's 2G. 3 times as much is 3G. So when when they talk about a pilot or a racing car driver doing a 4G turn, it means they're experiencing 4 times the weight of gravity basically. And 4G in a normal road car, you probably wouldn't be able to pull that. That is getting into territory of Formula One cars and that sort of thing. 4G is a huge amount of load to sustain. You can, instantaneously, when you do like a roller coaster or something like that, you probably hit more than that instantaneously, but it's literally for an instant. And that's why you feel heavy when you go down a dip. But imagine that continuously for, forever, basically. You would be crushed. So that's interesting. It's interesting specifically that it's mentioned. It could just be this whole flavour thing, and I think probably is with that one. But why tell us that? Other than, as we know, the rocket has a weight capacity. Does that factor in, basically? Is what that's saying, that in order to launch a rocket on Vulcanus, it's going to require 4 times as much fuel? Or it wouldn't scale linearly, in fact, but they could just do it to represent it. But you spend a lot of rocket fuel to get off of the planet of Earth on Nauvis, which is basically Earth. If it's 4 times as much gravity, you would expend 4 times, you would expend more, but you'd expend a heck of a lot more fuel to get there. So effectively, is what that's saying. We know that the engineer, because they've said, can basically instantaneously transport between, back to the ship. There's not really I think they've said that anyway, that there's not really a kind of space elevator or that type of mechanic. It's just a sort of, you transfer. But if you're getting stuff out into orbit, you're getting stuff out into your, onto your space platform. Is that sufficiently heavy that it makes doing that a really big challenge? Because you're going to have to make a hell of a lot of rocket fuel to get off a planet compared to Nauvis. Or as I say, is it just some flavour text? Magnetic field, 25%. Presumably that's based on Nauvis normal. Don't know. Also, again, what's the relevance of that? We'll come on to that in a second. Pressure, 4,000 hectopascals. I don't actually know what that is in relation to Earth. Okay, so pressure at sea level is 1,000, basically, hectopascals. So in other words, the pressure you feel at Earth's, sea level, basically, so at surface level on Earth is a quarter. So not only is it 4 times, that sort of makes sense because the air is squished down. So, but 4 times the gravity, it's 4 times the pressure on the surface. I say the engineer. If the engineer is human, to me, what this is saying is you probably, I don't know that they'll do it, but you would need some kind of exposure suit basically. But so I don't think they'll go that far. But it feels like you would have to have an exoskeleton, and you would have to have a pressure suit of some description. And that, you could only go there once you got those, but I don't think they're going to do that. So it's interesting they have these things. Solar power in atmosphere, 400%. So solar panels are going to be 4 times as effective on Vulcanus as they are on Earth, on Nauvis rather, which makes sense because we know we know it's close to the sun. We also know we're getting very limited space to build. So having a bit of a boost to solar panels is helpful and makes sense. Evolution factor 0. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I don't know if that is because on now, they may have set it to 0, or it's just because it's in creative. But obviously, the evolution factor is something you can set in the game in order to control the speed with which biters evolve. And I would have thought we would get some kind of ratio. That Vulcanus would have, half the biter evolution or twice the biter evolution or something like that. But 0, I don't know if that means there just is no biter evolution on Vulcanus. It is what it is. Don't know. Robot energy usage times 1. So robots use the same amount of power as they do on Nauvis. Again, going back to the point I was making earlier, why even mention that unless it's a factor somewhere? So that to me implies that there will be planets where robot energy usage is not 1. Which planets could that be? Solar power in space, 600%. So that's for your platforms. They'll be able to recharge a lot quicker. You would expect, there's no atmosphere to go through, so solar power is always better to collect in space. So yes, let's switch to the zoomed in one for the rest of it, because what we've got here is connections. So this is clearly the connections you can make between different planets using your space platforms. My assumption is that this will fill up or reduce depending on connections we've made. What it could be saying is that you can only connect Nauvis to these other two planets. You can only connect Vulcanus to these other two planets. That could be what it's saying. So I think what this is saying is basically just that you have set up a connection between Vulcanus and whatever this is, and Vulcanus and whatever this is. I don't know which. I assume one is Nauvis. I assume that's Nauvis. So this is clearly one of the other planets we've had revealed, but I don't recognise which one, if I'm honest. I think it might be the green planet, the biological planet. Whichever one it is, what the heck is this like pink, bright pink stuff? What could that represent? And it's gigantic. It's a whacking great chunk of the planet. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. The next part is hugely interesting because it's saying exclusive recipes. So these are the recipes that are locked to Nauvis. Now the obvious one is the science pack. That's what you'd expect. We knew that the foundry and the big mining drill were going to be what you get as rewards, as it were, for going to Nauvis. But this is also confirming, and I think they'd already said this, but I don't remember it being in the actual Friday Facts. The new belt tier is also a Vulcanus exclusive. Again, to me, that points to it using tungsten as one of its ingredients. And this is the steam sulfuric acid thing. They told us that basically the geysers can be tapped to get high pressure, high temperature steam. Not high pressure, but high temperature steam. I'm sure it'll be a high pressure by default, but high temperature steam, which you can actually run turbines off of. It's hot enough to run turbines, basically. So they're also a power source. But that will also have sulfuric. That's how you get the sulfuric acid, basically. You tap the geysers, and that gives you that. It's interesting. It describes it as a recipe. So this must actually, I guess, do we think, would be referring to the machine that's gonna tap the geysers? Because we don't actually know how we would tap a geyser. Well, you could obviously just tap him on the shoulder. But we don't know what the machine is that you put on there. And it doesn't really look like even a machine. So that's a bit interesting. Then there's more. So we've got these other icons here. It contains, this is like the resources and things that are on the planet. We kind of knew all this, I think. Because this is coal, which we knew about. This is the calcite. This is the tungsten. These are the trees, the burning trees and the non-burning trees. Then you've got the new rocks. You've got the new, what do you call it? Like, it's not really... oh no, those are the dead... So those are the dead geysers, basically. And these are the alive geysers, so they're still producing ones, because these are the new cliffs. This is the new cliff stuff. And they're obviously classifying them slightly differently, the meteor impacts. These three, I'm not 100% sure on. This, I think, is the lava. I think. I'm not 100% I quite understand what these are representing. I think this is a volcano erupting. From how it looks like to me. So I don't know if that's just representing lava as well. But to me, it kind of seems to be saying that we're going to get... The lava is going to erupt. That we're going to get lava eruptions going on. That could be interesting as a game mechanic. But this, as I say, I'm not sure. Initially, I thought it must be the sulfur, but these are the actual sulfur geysers. Maybe it's just representing the actual sulfur coming out, but it's difficult to tell what it is. Anyway, all of that, and probably the most interesting thing, is this here, asteroids. And there's a sort of a greyish one, a sort of a silverish one, and a sort of a bluish one. Now, we know asteroids are in the game. There's asteroid fields as you move about on your spacecraft. What we didn't know, and it was kind of hinted at by the fact that we're getting craters, is were these ever going to crash on the planet? Are they a hazard to anything other than space travel? And clearly they either are, or this means that around Vulcanus there are going to be these types of asteroids, maybe? I suspect this means that they will fall to Earth and they will crash to Earth, because that is a mechanic in SpaceX. And, it's perfectly logical, and it's a perfectly sensible thing to add. For me, the question is, what are they? We know we're getting carbon asteroids and iron asteroids, or metallic asteroids, shall we say. What's this blue one? Is that a new resource? I think I've mentioned before that I suspect asteroids will give us a new resource. I suspect that's the hidden, fifth we don't know about planet, as it were. And it's not really a planet, it's an asteroid field. And that will give us that other one. The other option is it's water. Basically, they did mention there'll be waterized asteroids, and it could be that. It could be a blue, icy, watery asteroid. But I certainly hope that, we get something interesting with asteroids, that you can properly mine asteroids. You can properly go out and harvest asteroids as a real and proper mechanic, not just as a sort of coincidental thing to give you, rocket fuel and stuff. Whew, I said there was a lot, didn't I? And all hidden in the Wikipedia. If an item has alternate recipes, they are also shown. So, for example, light oil, which is a fluid and is used in, as we know, several recipes, has several alternate recipes where you can make it out of, obviously the advanced oil processing gives you it, you can make it via coal liquefaction, and you can crack it from heavy oil to light oil. So that's just showing that alternate recipes will be displayed. Since parts of the expansion can be toggled the same way as we do with mods, naturally the Factoriopedia will support the information about any modded content added to the game. So that's a really good thing for mods generally. It presumably gives them a nice interface for doing all these added pieces of information and producing something similar for their mod to integrate well with the thing. But in particular, it shows tooltip showing additional data when the quality mob is enabled. So it comes up with this little diamond by the thing, and you can hover over to see what are the effects of quality on this item. So a change of quality, doesn't affect stack size, doesn't affect rocket capacity, but health is improved by quality, supply area is increased, and wire reach is increased. These are just the most obvious examples, and we covered many more similar kind of relationships to aid discoverability. Alt is your friend. Factoriopedia can be opened by clicking the dedicated button, but that isn't very convenient. Especially when we are looking at an object in the game and scratching your head saying, what the hell is this supposed to do? Don't worry, you can just Alt left click practically anything and you will be transported right to the correct Factoriopedia page. Whether it is an unfamiliar building, unfriendly neighbour, a forgotten item in your inventory, or a strange new recipe. From this point, you can continue to navigate Factoriopedia by clicking each individual button. Why have they bound that to Alt? That seems a weird thing to do, because we can obviously rebind keys, and one of my secret little top tips is to rebind the Alt key to Alt-GR, particularly if you're someone who uses Alt-Tab to switch between tabs when you're playing, because if you do, you'll turn off Alt, basically, as you Alt-Tab around. But why bind it to Alt? Because that, it should be Control-Alt or something like that, a double thing, because every time you click Alt, it's going to turn that off or on, which is going to be really annoying. I say you can rebind them, but why have it default to that? But yes, basically what it's saying is you can use the Alt click and go straight to the Factoriopedia entry, which sounds nice and convenient. Browse history. To wrap things up, we have to address the elephant in the room in the form of the two arrows next to the search button. These two here that I mentioned as we were going through. When you navigate through GUIs in the game, we store the history of what you had open. You can then use the standard Alt plus left arrow and Alt plus right arrow to go backwards or forwards, or the back forward on the mouse button. Using it feels very natural. The initial motivation for this system was the interactions with multiple planets and remote view. The typical scenario is when you do something remotely on a different planet and close the remote view, you can just press the shortcut to return to where you left off immediately. This might feel like a little detail, but it is one of the many features that we can't live without anymore. This system was extended over time to include Factoriopedia, Technology GUI, Blueprint Library, Train Overview, and many others. As always, help us expand our Feedbackpedia at the usual places. I've pretty much gone through all the speculation that I kind of had as we went through. My overall thought on this, really brilliant. I think this is a great quality of life improvement. A lot of the information could be kind of worked out in the game, but in a really difficult or confusing or weird how to do way. And I think a big problem with the game is this fact that you unlock something and you don't know what the heck it's for. You obviously can see how you make it, but you don't know what to use it for, so you're not getting any feeling of is this an item I really need to make loads of? Can I just have one assembler making it? Can I handcraft it? That type of thing of how important something is isn't really conveyed. So something like red circuits, which are used in all sorts of recipes, this instantly, to me, if I was seeing that, I'd be like, oh my god, I need to make a lot of red circuits because they are used everywhere. That's a really nice improvement, and the ability to navigate around. As I say, I hope tech tree can be accessed via that button. That would be really useful. It would be a pain and annoying to close it and then open the tech tree. But yeah, so that's a really nice general improvement. I wasn't sure when we saw the green belts where they were going to come in. My thought was, because I think, I've got this theory that the planets are kind of linked to a type of boost in the game. So there'll be one that's about production, Vulcanus, one that's about speed, the lightning planet, one that's about efficiency, the bio planet. That's my sort of overriding thoughts on the thematic, nature of the planets. And I thought, I don't know, but I think I thought that the new belts would be on the speed planet because it's faster. But it does make sense that it's a production throughput thing. Interestingly, we know we're also getting this pile stack, inserter, and that is not listed as an exclusive recipe to Vulcanus. So that confirms that that is on a different planet. I think we knew that already, but it's nice to see that this point about things being locked to planets is a real thing. There is nothing military here that I can see, which is interesting. I was under the impression, from one of the things they'd said, that we would get the ability to use a new weapon on Vulcanus. The implication was that there'd be maybe a lava spitting thing, or maybe an acid spitting thing. I mean, this doesn't look like an acid spitting icon. It doesn't look like a military one. Would it count as a recipe though, or would it just count as a? But it could be, for example, that you can hook up flamethrower turrets to like molten metal or something like that, and it can spit molten metal at the biters. We don't see, and I'm guessing because there is a bit here we're not seeing, and we've already we don't know what the planet ones look like in full, but I'm guessing there is a thing down here that tells us what the biters are, the enemies or threats or whatever you want to call it. And that would sort of, if you look at the size of that to there and that feels like the scroll down distance. So I think there's an extra category here of biters, and it'll tell you what biters are on the planet. And so I'm guessing that perhaps there's a new biter. We thought there was when they announced it, but I think this is kind of what would be on the bottom is the threats or enemies or however you want to phrase it. And maybe there'll be a new rocky biter on this planet. The other one I did want to mention, of course, was rocket capacity. The rocket capacity seems to be quite low. It was mentioned as quite a low number. I had thought they'd kind of caved and increased it, but you can only put a single stack of substations on an entire rocket. Now that doesn't matter, I'm sure you can fit a lot more than that on a space platform, so fine. But effectively you're almost saying that rockets are like a sort of a super inserter, because an inserter, and particularly a stack insert, or the new file inserter, that can do, is it 50? I can't remember, is it 15 or 16? Well, that's 15, 30. If it's 15, that's only 3 swings of an inserter, of a stack inserter arm, and you've filled up, or 4 swings, I guess, and you've filled up a rocket. That's not a lot at all. I mean, I appreciate these are big and hulking great things, but that is not a lot at all. So stack size 50, rocket capacity 50. So you can only put 50 of those on a rocket. Stack size 50, rocket capacity 50. Wow, so you can only put 50 electric poles on a rocket. Wow. Circuits, they stack to 200, so that's 5 stacks. Okay. Oh, it's interesting that actually does tell you what the stack, how many stacks you can put in. But even so, 1,000 red circuits is not a lot. 5 stacks of red circuits. So yeah, it looks like there's going to be a real logistical challenge with using rockets, basically, because especially if this comes to pass, that they do require a lot more fuel to get off of Vulcanus. It does start to feel like really, and this was what they were saying, they didn't want planets to just become outposts. They wanted them to be functional factories, and one of the ways of doing that is by limiting your rocket throughput, basically. So now it really implies that Vulcanus, you need to build a factory that's going to build belts locally, that's going to build power poles locally, that's going to build everything you need, bots and all that sort of stuff locally, because otherwise shipping everything over with a rocket, or with a platform via rocket, is going to be an absolute pain in the bum. and would take just ages. So you're far better off building a factory on Vulcanus. And I say, if this is even harder to launch stuff from, requires even more fuel, it makes sense that the only thing you would want to send back is tungsten, because, or and probably process tungsten, because then you can build your foundries at your home planet, for example. But I mean, how many foundries can we put in a rocket? That's not shown on this one, is it? I bet it's like 2. Interesting. So it seems like maybe really you're just going to want to send the most high value items basically via rocket and via space platform. So you'd want to send the science packs, because we know that they will require tungsten to make. So they're a processed item. They did say you could put a lot of science packs into a rocket. So it feels like really science packs and then a bit of the exclusive resource so that you can, process things. We know from one of the previous Friday Facts that it had the calcite on, so clearly that's sufficiently useful to be sent around that you would put it on a rocket. So that was all of my sort of other thoughts, but I kind of went through them all as we were going through, and there's a lot, for a simple entry, and this is what I was really hoping for. I've been moaning a bit, I know, about not really telling us anything about the new stuff. I don't need them to tell us new stuff. What I need them to do is drop little things in and let my brain do its magic, basically, and just come up with a load of rubbish, because that's what I really enjoy doing with these. And I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've got ideas about, why are we getting... do you think these are tungsten ingots and tungsten plate? Or do you think there's something else? How do we make tungsten ingots? Is it just smelting tungsten plate, or do we have to add something in? Why does tungsten carbide look like concrete? In fact, is that's not refined concrete, is it? That's just regular concrete, I think. But why does it look like that? And why would we want to put down tungsten on the floor if it is also a material that you can do that with, because it looks like a type of concrete? What would a tungsten carbide floor be needed for? It could just give a speed boost, but why? But yeah, would love to hear your thoughts and speculations and wild ideas as to what you think some of this stuff is for. What do you think this icon is, this one weird one here? Is that some sort of sulfur? What the heck is going on in that icon? Does this icon hint that we're going to get, actual explosions of volcanoes? They describe them as volcanoes, and then they just look like lava fields. Are they going to be proper volcanoes? Are volcanoes going to erupt on Vulcanus? What are asteroids about? Do they crash on the surface? What do you think? Let me know. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another. If you want to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday on my Twitch channel @Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Who am I apologising to? But why?